Hi, I'm Mike Sibley, leader and member of the James Moore manufacturing team. I'm here today with my co-host, Kevin Golden, also a member of our manufacturing team. We are excited today to welcome Ira Sharp Jr., Director of Product Management at Phoenix Contact USA, to this month's episode of More on Manufacturing. Ira brings a wealth of experience in automation and industrial technology. His work focuses on advancing operational efficiency through innovative automation solutions. His insights are helping shape how manufacturers approach rapidly changing production landscape. So today we're going to talk about operational trends in the manufacturing industry, how manufacturers are adapting to evolving technologies, workforce dynamics, and other global challenges, while also finding opportunities for long-term growth and resilience. So Ira, welcome to the show. We're very excited to have you on here.
It's great to be here. Thanks for having me on, and it's awesome to have a conversation like this. I've been involved in the industry for a long time, and those that know me well know that I definitely like to talk about the topic. So excited to dive in.
Oh, we're excited. We can't wait to get into it.
I'll say so. Buckle up for a long episode right now.
Listen, 12 hours, we're good with that, right?
Let's do it.
Yeah. Well, Ira, for our listeners who may not be familiar with Phoenix Contact, why don't we start there? Start a little bit about the company, a little bit about your role there.
So Phoenix Contact as a company is actually a German company, a Mittelstand company as it's called, privately held. We're 100 years old and really got started in the industrial industry quite a long time ago, making what's called a terminal block, which is a small little device, clips on a thing called a DIN rail, and it connects two wires together. And really have evolved from there to make all types of components that go inside of industrial control cabinets. And our products today are used really across the world, across industries, from factory automation to process automation to food and bev, material handling, pretty much wherever it is. Personally, I'm responsible for the US market and all of our automation components. So that's PLCs, it's industrial computers, IPCs, it's our HMIs, human machine interfaces, industrial networking equipment, cybersecurity, all of those types of things. So whether it's smart, communicates, or collects information, those are the components that I'm responsible for in the US.
Right. So safe to say, not only are you giving your advice and your thoughts today, which we appreciate on operational trends, but you're living it every day or in the US with your company. So good to know.
Yep.
Thanks for that background. Now, you're also co-founder of the Industry 4.0 Club, correct?
Yep.
Yeah. Well, tell us a little bit more about that.
So outside of my day job of
Right.
running all this business in the US, I am very heavily involved in the community efforts at large in the area of industrial automation. So the Industry 4.0 Club is one example of that, where several years ago, and I think the early days of COVID, like many, stuck at home, found another group that liked to talk about industrial automation, and got involved pretty heavily with a platform called Clubhouse. I don't know if you're familiar with Clubhouse at all, but it was a platform that was really hot, still out there, still available, but it's really great for communications just like this. But you'd have an audience, and then you could pull people up on stage to kind of have a conversation. So you could have like a podcast, but then also have other people join in the conversation in a regular fashion. But the intent of that group is a group of us that would talk about people, a process, technology, business, all across the board with relation to the Industry 4.0 initiative and IoT at large, and how that's shaping manufacturing, how it's being applied, and really taking a real practical look at things. So that's what that group is about. But then in addition to that, I'm very heavily involved in just general activities, pretty active on LinkedIn, pretty active in different types of podcasts and outreaches in various forms. So if it's not just about trying to sell my products, because I am the marketing guy for the industry at Phoenix Contact, but it's really about helping particularly small to mid-sized manufacturers find their place, be able to collect and use data in advanced manufacturing.
So what drives you? I mean, everything you say, we're involved in small, medium size manufacturers. We're involved in, we do a lot of fractional CFO work. So all of the IoT, the automation, the ROI, the tax, all those kind of things dealing with it. So we're in it every single day. But what's driving you to be, you're this marketing guy selling these products, but also trying to drive change. What's motivating you to do that? What's driving you to do that?
Yeah, so it's a really good question, and I think simply put, it's a little bit of a passion. So
Right.
I grew up and I went to college, right? So first 2 years of college were fun, and then the next 2 years of college I buckled down and tried to figure out what I wanted to do with my career, and found that I was good at math, so I got an engineering degree. But I'd always had done sales all through college. That's what put me through college. So when I got out of college, I found a position that could really marry my technical expertise with my business expertise, and this technical marketing was a perfect scenario with it. So then I started to really go out and look at different applications, but I had no idea what industrial was or really what it was all about, and really started to see what impact it really had. And so today, the reason I do and try to get involved and what I get involved in is continual learning. So
Mhm.
I feel that you can never learn enough, you can never know enough. And particularly in this world of manufacturing and industrial, there's a constantly evolving landscape, whether it be technical, whether it be the ROI, whether it be the business aspects of it. There's so many levers that are pulling, and
Mhm.
things are changing so rapidly. I wanted to explore other avenues. So the
Mhm.
reason I got involved was to learn the things that I didn't know, to
Mhm.
simply have conversations with other areas of the business to become more well-rounded.
Mhm.
So that's why I've done this, and I've tried to keep an open mind. And while, yeah, I may be an expert in some areas, I'm not in a lot of areas. I'm learning just like everybody else, and I continue to look to explore in those areas.
Yeah, that's awesome. I think that's exactly what, years and years and years ago, I was auditing manufacturers, and it was just so much fun seeing the change, the technology. I still have stories of how you could see using lasers to analyze logs to produce the best output and yields on those logs compared to commodity pricing. And, it was just so cool to watch all of this stuff happen in manufacturing. So I can definitely agree with, and that's kind of what's driven my manufacturing passion too. So it's kind of nice to hear. So it's a good segue as, we start talking about what is going on in the manufacturing industry right now. And, there's, as always, there's a ton. It's in the news every day, whether it's tariffs or onshoring or nearshoring, whatever it might be, the technology, IoT, those kind of things. How do you kind of gauge its health, and what kind of trends are you seeing right now?
Yeah, so it's a hard question to answer, but I'll say if we narrow it in and we're going to look at
Mhm.
small to mid-size I mean, we can look at the overall landscape.
Right.
There is a really high level view on things that I'd like to take a look at. There's a particular report. It's produced quarterly, and it's from a analytics firm called IoT Analytics.
Hmm.
And I don't know if you're familiar with this at all, but they have a report that's what CEOs are talking about, and it's a great little bubble chart, a little dot chart that just analyzes business reports from thousands of companies and plots them on a chart to basically say how often is this word used, and is it growing in importance or is it shrinking in importance. But a high level, it gives you an idea on a quarterly basis of what all manufacturers are talking about. And what's really great is you can definitely see like tariffs came in and it's growing in importance, but it's kind of new. And then it kind of like it
Right.
also, well, tariffs didn't really go away, but you'll see these topics come in and they'll go away. And you'll see these waves. So it really does show the report's value. But there's staples in there. And one of the biggest things that's happening in the industry, if sure there's tariffs and we can talk about supply chain and all those kind of things if you'd like, but on the factory floor, the biggest trend that I've seen staying is it's changed names, but IoT or Industry 4.0 or big data or cloud, they all have the same meaning. I think from a CEO perspective, not to take
Right.
anything away from that, but high level, it's doing more with the same stuff you have, whether that's the same people, the same machines, or the same operations. And the way people are trying to do that is usually through data and then leveraging data to make meaningful change in operation. That's the way that I like to put it. So there is this growing trend to try to do that. Now, when you look at the big users, the Frito-Lays or the Pfizer or whatever, and I deal with those companies, it's awesome because they have teams of people that are able to analyze situations or spend hundreds of thousands or even millions of dollars to implement strategies to try to collect this data and then normalize the data and then try to use the data so they can do it. That's one section of the market. And trust me, as the marketing guy that sells components into that area, I love those areas. But then there's this whole other segment of the small to mid-size guys. And sometimes they can do it, and a lot of times they can't. And it's not because they don't want to. It's because they just don't have the budget. They don't have the funding. They don't have the ability to do it because of various reasons. And there is a growth of organizations. CESMI is one of them, CESMII, if you're not familiar with it. And this is a group that's actually funded by the Department of Energy that is there to help enable small to mid-sized manufacturers do more with data by providing profiles and these kinds of things to help edge along those types of activities with small to mid-sized manufacturers, where the big guys are just doing it and funding it themselves. This is kind of like a collectively funded group and government-funded group to help these guys move along, because, as I'm sure your audience knows, small to mid-sized manufacturers make up the majority of what manufacturing is, and without them, things aren't good. So we need to make sure that all of manufacturing has come along for this digital evolution and not just the big guys. Otherwise, they won't be able to compete in the future markets. So it's really where I see things going.
Yeah, you're absolutely preaching to the choir. So this is actually what we're dealing with every single day with our clients is, some of it is they don't have the skill sets internally to do it, even if they had the time, or more resources, so it's bringing skill sets. And so we're often getting involved in taking all this complex data and simplifying it in a way that can make useful decisions. But I completely agree. We're having that conversation in every single client situation now. So, and it's only, and it's for that reason. Well, one of the things we do see is people who are trying to get the information. You might have multiple people in the same organization trying to work the same data. And so, I've got a client tell me, I think they've got a small business, they got 2 FTEs per year just pulling data. And oftentimes it's a lot of overlapping stuff. So we need to simplify. We can automate. There's a lot of things you can do without putting tens and millions of dollars into resources in order to do that. So I think there are simple ways to accomplish it and get what you need to as you build up to better automation systems.
Yeah.
Well, and I mean, it's, I like saying it simply put, we want to do more without doing more, right? We don't have all more of those resources. Great when we grow into that and as we have more, but I mean, even the labor market and so forth, we can only have so much, right? And so with that pressure on those small and medium-sized manufacturers and so forth to say, okay, well, I've got these various limitations we just talked about, but we also see that, like you said, Mike, I don't have to break the bank and then redo my entire system just to be able to compete, right? Sometimes it's just as low hanging fruit or expertise I need to bring in. But knowing that, in your opinion, Iro, where if I'm a small to mid-sized manufacturer, then and I say, okay, great, I need to have some of this modernization, if you will, or this digital evolution, as you called it. Where am I going to start? I mean, there's a lot of shiny objects. There's a lot of things to get distracted by, and I have limited resources to an extent. What is, in your opinion, kind of some of maybe a good place to start to be more digitally evolved?
Yeah. So it's a huge question, and it has lots of polarizing answers. So I'm sure I will upset people by giving my answer, and that's okay. Because
all right, it's gonna be a first for this show. We're gonna have a polarizing topic. I love it.
Here we go. But I like to say, you need to have a problem you're trying to solve, particularly if you're small to mid-size, because you need to have I hate to say it, but you need to have an ROI. And I hate to say it because of course you need to have an ROI, but there is an element of you need to think bigger than just the immediate ROI. So
Right.
you need to do something that can have causality so that you can see some sort of return, but you need to do it in a way that is scalable. So there's a lot of fixed solutions or thread type solutions that if you want to do power monitoring, for example, great. You can throw some power monitoring devices like a CT and some other pieces on a machine. You can figure out how much power it's using. That can tell you a lot of things. So yes, how much power are you using? When are you using it? Those are the basic things. But then you can correlate it to the operator that's running the machine, how often it's running. Is the machine producing the same yield at the same or at different power levels? Maybe you can see wear and tear on the machine. It can give you a lot of insights just by looking at the
Right.
power. And then you can use that data to maybe throttle things back or change your maintenance cycle. So all these other things. So that's a very powerful tool, and it's one of the most common ones because it's easy to implement and it has a pretty clear ROI for most machines and most applications. And you can do it where it goes right up to the cloud. You can analyze it and you're off to the races. But if you don't do it in a way that, maybe you're collecting the data in using standard fashion, like an ISA 95, for example, where you're collecting the particular machine on the particular line and the particular plant, which may just be one facility with these particular
Right.
variables. When you go to the next step and, oh, well, now maybe I want to do vibration monitoring, or maybe I just want to look at the alarms on the PLC, or you don't have the ability to scale that. So you need to think a couple steps further so that you can scale it up. And there are architectures out there, there are philosophies out there that if you follow those, you'll be able to scale with it. And while it may be challenging on the onset and make the initial project harder, it will make the next step much easier.
So
Right.
when you're looking at some of this stuff, in terms of some of it feels like, okay, yeah, you kind of have to identify maybe there's a problem to begin with. So getting back to your point of what is the data? So you talk about vibrations or you talk about power usage or some of those kind of things, getting down to even maintenance levels. In the small and medium sized businesses, sometimes the owner or is the chief engineer, is the chief, person that's driving the business and not necessarily maybe even thinking about those things. How do they take a step back and say, okay, let me look at first what kind of data or information might be necessary? And I'm not talking about specific, but maybe almost like a little bit of a framework or brainstorming to say, okay, where do I need to think about uh, what can be most meaningful to me as a starting point?
And this, so it's difficult because it's going to be really variable for pretty much any kind of machine or any kind of application. So you need to look at what's directly impacting the results of the operation. But with it, it's easier to at least move the large majority of data and then later on figure out what you want to use. So we use the example of a particular machine, and I use the idea of power monitoring because it's something that a lot of people can relate with. You could do that, but at the same time, you look at the overall yield of the machine. You could look at the input. You could look at the raw materials that you're using. You could look at the operator, how often the operator is interacting with the machine. All these kinds of things are usually variables that are already sitting there.
Mm-hmm.
This is a point of the scalability where it would be great. And my recommendation is to take all of that data and move it. Now, you don't have to store all that data, but move it. Move it to a common place. And from there, you can figure out, do you want to store that data or not store that data? But having the data there can make it very easy in the second step to go, oh, well, maybe it would be really nice if I knew how often the operator was touching this or adjusting
Right.
this or whatever else. Adding that in at the programming level, like all the way down on the device level, later
Mm-hmm.
on is a major effort. But doing it at the data level where you've already collected the data and it's sitting there, even if it's not being used, is so much easier.
Gotcha.
So and it's a slippery slope because Lord knows there is so much data from all of these
Mm-hmm.
machines, but
Right.
getting as much data as possible up so that you can make incremental improvements at the data level is so much easier in the long run.
Gotcha.
Knowing that you missed that one temperature and oh, now I have to go shut down the machine and I have to go look at it's a major investment versus I'm sitting there in the evening and I'm trying to look at my data and it'd be really nice to know what that temperature was. Oh, well, I have that variable. I just need to record it tomorrow.
Gotcha. Gotcha. Okay. Because that was going to be the next thing is you can do this and maybe just doing it to collect data, but then you end up with so much, you get
Right.
overwhelmed with, okay, I've got, millions of records of data points here. How do I make heads or tails out of this stuff?
Yeah.
That's
So
good.
there is an architecture out there. I don't know if you're familiar with it. The audience is familiar with it called the UNS, the Unified Namespace.
Mhm.
It's a common term that's being used. And really what this is, it it's an area for data to flow into and then go out of. So a lot of
Mhm.
people when they think of this digital ecosystem is data generates here and goes there and it gets stored. But again, not everything needs to be stored all the time. Not everything is right for every application. You may have some data that goes to an HMI, another one goes to a SCADA. The same data may go to a historian, that you can look at later on. And those could all be on one device, like one computer, or they could be separate devices. And that just becomes on how big your application is. Frito-Lay is going to have a very different operation than someone that has a small operation that's, you know, um, doing a small bottling line for something or making a
Right.
machine for bottling.
Right. So I guess it's safe to say then what you're saying is we don't necessarily need to track every single little data point and say at all times, look at all this, which is overwhelming, but at least we have the opportunity to pull that and use that as needed, depending on, what we're trying to measure, what ROI we're trying to look at. Now we have almost unlimited, not technically, but virtually almost unlimited possibilities of what we could be tracking depending on what the situation or the manufacturer calls for.
Exactly. And of course there's, gray areas all through that. But
Mhm.
in an ideal world, you need to figure out what you need to have an ROI so you can prove
Right.
this and not go bankrupt in trying to actually execute on this.
Right.
Don't stop there. Add the extra, couple of screws to make sure the thing that you're building is going to be stable. And collect that extra information, meaning move the extra information so it's sitting there, and then
Mhm.
you can store it or you can not store it because storage is expensive. So
Mhm.
then you can figure out later on. But it's a lot easier to go to your database and go, oh, we'll start recording this extra variable later
Right.
on if it's already been moved.
Sure.
Right.
Sure.
Right.
So you're kind of going from here's some things we should do. What are you seeing as, the biggest obstacles for SMBs that you kind of come across in some of the extra the other job you do? I don't want to say, it's not that they're not embracing it. Perhaps there are other reasons why they're just not able. Well, what do you see as those obstacles often?
Yeah, I think it's pretty clear. It's time and money is the biggest obstacles.
Mhm.
I mean, and so I think we're primarily talking about manufacturers here. I
Mhm.
don't know
Yeah.
if you also talk. Well, I mean, if you look at manufacturers of equipment
Mhm.
manufacturers, OEMs.
Yeah.
I
Mhm.
it, so I don't know if it's exactly where you wanted to take the question. You can course correct me, but I think there's a great topic there where if you're making conveyors or you're making, a
Mhm.
rotary or whatever it is, a sequencing machine that goes into a larger manufacturer's operations, that time and money are going to be the biggest reasons why you don't integrate this. Also, the other reason is people may not care. So if you're making a rotary machine and yeah, you listen to this podcast and you thought it was great to collect all this data, but at the end of the day, that's going to cost you an extra couple $100,000, $2,000, $3,000 to your machine. Why would you do that? Because you just made your machine more expensive than everybody else's machine, which means you get less orders. That is
Right.
completely valid. And honestly, it's probably right. But the alternative take on that is if you're collecting the data and making that, I call it IT data, available while you're still running your OT, your PLC operations, you've now made your machine digitally ready so that
Right.
marketed, you're now more marketable. Now, will someone pay for that? Well, that's a different conversation. But you've
Right.
added value to your machine that now could set you apart from your competition. That if you can sell that to the user, the end
Mhm.
person that's going to make your equipment, you are light years ahead of where your competition is. And
Yeah.
that will be a catalyst at some point, I believe, because that digitalization is going to work its way all the way down to the OEM level to make things digitally ready for integration. And then from an OEM perspective, if you can think about it for a minute, now this is, I would say, a couple of years out, or I would love to see people doing this today, but it is completely in the realm of possibility. If you were able to collect data from your machine, think of how valuable as an OEM, as an
Mhm.
owner, of how you could improve your machine over time by having information from uses of your device over tens of hundreds or thousands of operations.
Right.
You could tweak this and tweak that to make it perform better, which then you could give to your users or have them pay as a SaaS, the ability
Mhm.
to make the machine more efficient. An
Right.
example of this that's, I think, very relatable, that's outside of this industry a little bit, is Tesla. And you look at the cars, like
Mhm.
that's a machine, that's a
Right.
smart machine, and it's designed for critical operations, which is carrying a family around town. This
Hmm.
machine uses vision and all kinds of other things to drive itself. This is
Yeah.
precious cargo, critical operations, and can receive and update in your garage overnight. Why are
Right.
we okay with that, but we're not okay with doing that in a factory floor environment? Uh,
Hmm.
I, I I think it's a little bit future, like you asked about kind of where things are going. I think this is further out, but I believe this is a place where things are going, and it could be a very distinct advantage for OEMs,
Hmm.
particularly on the sales side of things, for the future, and really set up the next level of OEMs for the future.
Yeah, I agree. Interesting. I was out at a trade show, metal, fabrication trade show not too long ago, and every piece of machinery there talked about the data that I could give you
Hmm.
and the information that you could use. And if I'm looking to make my operations better, you think about right now, margin pressures are huge, whether it's because material costs, labor costs, whatever else costs. So you know, back to the point of everybody's trying to find little ways to make those tiny changes that improve your operations. To me, this is part of the future of that because that's the next level down is really fine tuning what your equipment can do. And without it, I don't know how you're going to get there. At the end of the day, it's got to be part of the future.
Right.
And the nice thing is when you talk about the dollars, I'll get into the accounting side for a second. There's our research and development tax credits. There's depreciation things that there are tax strategies you can use to take advantage of that and help alleviate some of the short term cash flow burden on improving those things.
Yeah. And I think too, again, it goes back to what you said earlier. Ari. You said, well, are we fixing problems that are just right in front of us? Or are we fixing problems that are 10 steps ahead, right? Preparing ourselves to be able to pivot, to be able to change as these times do very quickly. Say, great, I'm not now constantly catching up, constantly on fire because I'm trying to stay ahead this ever moving curve. I'm actually on the curve or slightly ahead, to be able to pivot a little bit easier. I mean, like you said, my margins are thin. Uh, Look at the controversial topic, tariffs, right? The big topic everyone's talking about with that. Well, when that comes into play, depending on what does or does not stick, because I feel like it changes every other day. But with that, how are you able to pivot or not? Well, if like you said, Mike, if you're able to shave off on your margin because you're constantly improving, right? Then you're able to, that's still going to be a pain, but maybe it's not quite as big as a pain as it is for your competitor who have just maybe just about put them out of business. So I think it gives you flexibility then for today's problems certainly, but also in the future and how we continue to evolve and grow from there.
Well, every pricing conversation that our manufacturing clients are having with their customers or their suppliers, in those conversations are promises to improve efficiency, to try to cut. So in other words, they're giving a price increase, but they're trying to limit that through pushing supply chain and through operational efficiencies. That is becoming part of every single conversation on pricing now. Uh, Not that it's been part of conversations in the past. I've never seen it become part of the negotiating to this level before. I don't know if you've seen the same thing.
So say that again, though. I'm not sure I completely followed.
Okay. So basically, getting back to margin thought processes and the pressure on margins and pricing, companies are trying to find ways to become more efficient than ever before because it's becoming part of the promises they're making to their customers. In that, hey, I'm going to only give you an X% increase because we're going to work on operational improvements, which they've been doing all along anyway, but they're trying to find ways to dig deeper into those operational improvements. I've never seen it as much a part of negotiations as I have recently.
Yeah, yeah. So, I mean, I agree. Now, and when you look at it, I don't know how you make those operational improvements. I mean, there's the big pieces that you can do, by
Right.
looking at your machine, but you really need information. You need,
Mhm.
and information is key, not data, but information,
Right.
to figure out what you can tweak and move. And it goes
Mhm.
back to what I was talking about in the beginning of, yeah, absolutely. And so information, by the way, is in my opinion, is contextualized data. So knowing the analog value or the pressure or the cycles is great, but knowing the context behind that, this was the operator, this is the time, this was all the other variables that go along with it, time of day, the humidity in the room, whatever that is, having that context really allows you to build the model, whether that's the crazy AI stuff or you just analyzing the data. Um, you know, you can't make those meaningful changes. But yeah, there are prices are going up for
Right.
all kinds of different reasons, and across the board. And price of a machine will follow to the finished good, which will follow to the consumer. That just happens. But we all know that we're all getting pinched all over the place. So you eventually just need to make things more efficient.
Mhm.
It's what we're all talking about. I do believe the whole topic has been accelerated. It has accelerated since mid-COVID and the supply chain crisis that we had there, across the board, and that brings up other topics which maybe we don't have the time to get into. Where you can talk about, there's a big topic that I look at in open automation, very involved in that space as well. I call it decoupling automation and what that means and how that's important. I deal with some hyperscalers, which I know is not in the mid small to mid size area, but it's critically important. Supply chain is important, to
Mhm.
make sure you have stuff, but also that the prices you have are appropriate. So
Mhm.
Right.
Yeah, we're seeing all of those things. I think it's interesting. You mentioned some of the larger businesses because manufacturers. It's inevitable at some point. Some of the things they're doing and taking on, the technology will improve and push its way down to the small and medium size. It just needs to not only work its way through an understanding, but also from a cost scaling standpoint. Eventually it becomes a little bit more, um, you know, practical for a small and mid-sized manufacturer to engage.
so on that, and I'm going to mess this up a little bit, because I'm trying to put it together in my head as I'm going to say it. But I actually read an interesting article, and it was eye opening to me because I think small to mid-size manufacturers actually have a strategic advantage over some of the large guys,
Mhm.
because in a lot of cases they haven't started this transformation yet. Where the
Mhm.
large guys, a lot of them have invested millions of dollars through
Mhm.
some sort of effort to collect data, normalize data, move data, do things with it, which means they already have an installed base and they have a structure that they have to deal with. So they
Right.
have to connect to that. Where the small guys haven't necessarily done that yet. So you're starting greenfield, and starting
Mhm.
greenfield to start with a new architecture with what we have today is very different than starting 10 years ago in an automotive facility where data is very much in abundance. But
Right.
what did you collect? When did you collect it? Is it contextualized? Is it normalized? Is it valid? Because
Mhm.
that's a big topic too, to be able to use it. So there is this a little bit of an advantage, which sounds counterintuitive, by being a little bit slow to start, whether that was on purpose or by means, to just get started now to be able to solve operations, because the tools today are very different than they were. I think we would all agree, than 3 years ago.
Mhm. Right. Right.
And the meaning of data today is very different than it was 3 years ago.
Right. Well, and I actually think that plays into so I agree. I think they have an incredible advantage. I think there's also some of the disadvantages or barriers that we talked about earlier that sometimes get in the way. But I do agree that technology is changing really quickly. That's allowing businesses of any size, forget just manufacturing for a second. There's all sorts of technologies for businesses across that are available now, easier to use, easier to get access to than there was 2, 3, 4 years ago. And I do think that COVID, particularly in manufacturing, but again, in many industries, accelerated a lot of the need to do this. It feels like, what used to say, hey, in 10 years, we're all going to be different. Then it became, hey, in 5 years, now it's like next month, the technology feels like it's going to be brand new again,
We're
with everything.
we're going through that that curve of computers like in the
Mm-hmm.
90s and the early 2000s where it was like every other week, like it
Right.
was just like everything doubled. And if you were like me, you were trying to game on a PC, and by the time you bought the game it was out of date and it was
Right.
terrible. And now like 2 years goes by and you're like, yeah, Word opened a little bit faster,
Yeah, right.
we're not to
Yeah.
that with this data topic yet, but we're definitely on that acceleration curve.
Yeah. Well,
Well,
it doesn't take long. I don't know about you, but I find myself with technology, it's like, well, it can't even do this now. And like a week after we get it, we're like disappointed in what it can do now because the next new thing's coming out.
Yeah.
right. All right, going back for just one second. I know, yeah, like you mentioned, we may be getting closer to the end, but you mentioned that's unique. I hadn't thought about that. About okay, we're actually in that small, medium-sized manufacturers at an advantage based on when they're starting this process compared to someone who's been doing this for over a decades, right? Then at what point in time, though, if I'm a small, medium-sized manufacturer, that if I don't jump on board, that strategic advantage now becomes a significant disadvantage to say, okay, well, now we can't just, I don't think that trend's going to continue. Obviously, something like COVID and all that revolutionized and changed the way we did it. Doesn't happen, but golly, when's the last time, ever, once in a lifetime? So how does that now, at what point in time does that become, okay, well, yeah, but you got to get on board now or in the next year or two? Well, what does that time frame you think look like before now? What was an advantage now is a distinct disadvantage because this revolution is passing you
Yeah.
um, by not jumping on board.
I just ordered my crystal ball from Amazon. Unfortunately, it's delayed. But no, I'm kidding, of course. I'm kidding, of course. It is a really good question. And of course, I mean, I firmly believe now. I mean, like the best time was yesterday, the best and the next best time is now. Like it really
Sure.
does need to happen. You're at that critical injunction point. Um, and yeah, things will continue to change. But that's why if you go back to the beginning, it's one of the reasons that I stress so much to not just take the easy road. And by the
Right.
way, I can offer you in my day job, I can offer you the easy road, and I can offer you a more challenging road. And I would encourage you to take the more challenging road. Actually, even though it may mean less revenue to my overall company, because it's the better thing for you to do, but you're shifting costs. So it becomes more of a capex versus opex investment at that point. But by doing it in a scalable way, you're going to be way better off, and you don't have to get crazy with it, but you need to do it. And by the way, we've been talking a lot about efficiencies and these kinds of things, but with a lot of small to mid-size manufacturers, again, you were mentioning the owner, maybe the chief architect, or maybe the operator, and these kind of things. Eventually, you can't do that, right? You will get to a point where you have to give it to somebody else, and the operator will need to change. And training that new operator and training the new people to do it is critically important. And doing that transition, of course, there's always succession planning, or there should be succession planning, and these kind of things that happen. You can do that through training, but you can also do that digitally. And if you're collecting the data and you can model what good behavior, good operator behavior looks like, whether it be in business or on a particular machine, you can guide so much better digitally than you could if you were just standing there. So it really helps you scale. And as I talked to my a good friend that is an advisor, and I know it's completely different than manufacturing, but looking at what you do well and focusing on what you do well, and then
Mhm.
trying to offload what you don't like doing or you don't do well is the key to your success. because you're going to enjoy doing this, you're going to excel doing this, and then you offload the other things. Maybe at some point you don't want to be running that machine, you need somebody else, but you need that person to run it like you were. If you're not training that model, you're not training that machine, you're going to spend countless hours trying to train that person, and God forbid that person leaves. Well, now you got to do it again. So being able to scale is critical, whether you're talking about building machines or the machine itself being used as an end user, or however you're slicing that.
Right. So, Ira, I appreciate you being on. We definitely getting close to our time here. Any final piece of advice for manufacturers as we wrap up?
So, I would encourage you to start taking a look at things. If you're worried about doing it in your own operations, just thinking about data, one of the best things to do from a very low dollar investment, just to get used to it, if you're going to be the one that's going to be integrating with it, is get involved in home automation and do something like Home Assistant with some Raspberry Pis or whatever else, because it shows you so much of what you can do, and it really does model directly over to what industrial operations can be. If you need help with it, there's a whole host of integrators and partners out there to help. I like to be very involved with things in general, so you can always reach out to me on LinkedIn. And I'm happy to help where I can. If that's connecting you, if that's giving you some advice, or just having a general conversation, I'm always willing to do that. So
awesome. Well, Ira, thank you so much. Appreciate all of your insights. Brings a lot of value, I think, to our listeners. And so for our listeners, thank you all for listening in and watching. We appreciate it. And of course, as Ira said, if you have questions, thoughts, comments, please always feel free to reach out to us. And again, thank you, and hope you all have a great rest of your day.
Thanks for having me.
To learn more about James Moore & Company's manufacturing services, go to jmco.com. And don't forget to subscribe to our More on Manufacturing series to receive updates when new videos and podcasts are released. If you'd like to be a guest, or if there's a topic you'd like to see covered on a future episode, contact us on our website. You can also follow us on social media for more news as the landscape on manufacturing continues to rapidly evolve.